Hi, I'm John Delaney, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with John Delaney about advice for comic book creators and much more. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. John hails from Winnipeg, Manitoba, but currently resides in Vancouver, British Columbia. He's an Emmy Award-winning storyboard artist, director, designer, animator, and comic book artist with over 20 years of experience in live-action production for both 2D and 3D animation, as well as gaming. John's client list is extensive and includes MGM, Universal, 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers, Hanna-Barbera, Disney, Nelvana, and Clasco Supo, just to name a few. As well, John is also a respected animation designer and director, and in a freelance capacity has performed these duties for North America's top studios, including Nelvana, Chinar, Studio B Productions, Nickelodeon, Deke, Funbag, Fred Wolf Productions, Bartle Entertainment, and worldwide biggies. John has worked freelance as a comic book artist for DC Comics and Bongo Comics. He has penciled a wide variety of characters such as Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and the Justice League, as well as Dexter's Laboratory, Scooby-Doo, Futurama, and The Simpsons. He was a penciler for the entire run of adventures in the DC Universe, including the covers, as well as the Superman vs. Lobo one-shot and several issues of Justice League Adventures, as well as many covers for the JLA Adventures. He's designed covers for JLA and Scooby-Doo. And to top it off, John's also a teacher in animation and comic book art at the Emily Carr Institute of Design and Capilano College. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with John Delaney about advice for comic book creators and much more. So, John Delaney, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
I appreciate your time. What I usually do to start off the interview is ask the creator about their first comic book. So I wonder if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
I believe the first comic book was a Neil Adams Batman. I'm almost positive that's the one that sort of always sits in my my memory. Batman was fighting a werewolf in that, and I've seen the cover. I think it was a giant size, like I think they were 25 cents back then or something. But it was a giant size 100 pager, and I'll never forget, being just absolutely blown away by Neil Adams' artwork and Batman. The way he kills the werewolf at the end. They're in top of a construction site, and he throws a metal bar and it goes right through him. And I'd never seen anything like that in a comic that I was aware of. That kind of extreme violence, but and I remember Batman being quite overtaken by his actions and stuff like that, and I just thought that was so cool. I think Denny O'Neil must have written it, but it was really cool.
Yeah, that was good stuff back then, that's for sure. But I'm wondering, who or what inspires you to create today?
There are so many creators out there right now in comics that I'm absolutely just jazzed on right now. I really like the work that Tom King has been doing lately as far as writing. I love his Mr. Miracle. I love Adam Strange. Eduardo Rizzo is always a big favorite. I love his work. It's so interesting and complex. Clay Mann right now is one of the ones I'm really following and digging his stuff. Love Brian Azzarello for writing as well. Yeah, I think those are probably my all-time favorites right now. I always like Alex Ross. That always, it's always so inspirational to see whatever he's working on. But I think, from an artist standpoint right now, I'm really, really blown away by Clay Mann's work. It's been just absolutely amazing.
All good folks there, that's for sure. So let's talk about your latest project. What are you up to today?
Well, I'm doing a couple things right now. There's a company called Source Point Press. A very good friend of mine, George McHale, has a book for them called Cover of Darkness that is doing very, very well for him right now. It's a reimagining of all the Universal horror characters. So Frankenstein takes place in the times of Atlantis, and it's his wife that brings him back to life. And so they all have different sort of origin stories than what they originally did, and they look quite a bit different. I'm doing a Bride of Frankenstein right now with that, and that's really, really fun. And I'm getting to just really stretch my muscles creatively because it takes place in all of the seven wonders of the world. So they're at the city of Troy, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the Colossus of Rome, all these things. So I'm having to draw these big, huge, epic widescreen type shots, and I'm really digging it. So that's super fun. The other thing I'm working on is something called Rock God NFT, Rock Gods. And those are, I'm sure you're very familiar with NFTs right now. They seem to be everywhere. And we're creating all these original digital pieces that can now be blockchained. And so they're actually become valuable and they can't be just cut and pasted. So they're all rock and roll stars. And we just finished doing one with Snoop Dogg. He seemed to get very interested in what we were doing and was commenting on it. So we did a drawing of him. But most of it is a guitar player, a bass player, a drummer, a singer, and a keyboard player. And each one of the characters are designed with multiple variations. So the hair can change, the clothes can change, the color of the skin can change. They can change sort of poses and different items of clothing and jewelry and stuff like that. So each time that the algorithm prints one out, it is a brand new original piece of artwork because we've put in all these different variables. So there's a chance to do almost get something. I think when we calculated it out, it came to about 30,000 different variables in each character, which is pretty cool. So I'm very excited to be working on that right now.
Yeah, it sounds like you're busy, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, you've got so much going on. I mean, you've got a career. I was looking at your bio. You've been a director, a storyboard artist, an animator, a comic book artist, and so much more. And I'm wondering, do you have a preference for one of those roles? Does one stand out above the other?
Well, from a pure joy standpoint, I will always love comics, probably more than anything else. It was something I wanted to do all my life. Directing and animation and all that came as a in the earlier days, it was very, very tough to get signed to those places. You had to send in tons of submissions and stuff like that. So it took me several years to get signed to DC Comics. So in the interim, I loved art and I loved comic books and stuff like that. So I thought, well, I'll start moving towards animation because there's always, work in that as long as, you're good. So I started doing that and worked in a company with my brother. We called Delaney and Friends Animation, and that started getting me in the door and ended up doing a bunch of different work for other people, and then started directing and storyboarding and doing all that kind of thing. So it's always been a wonderful passion, and I love animation and I love directing, but comic books, that singular vision, or that combined vision of the writer and the artist is something that I just absolutely adore. I still read comics every single Wednesday when they come out on Tuesdays, and so I'm still a big fan. So for me to be working in that industry is always a pleasure.
Cool. No, that's great. That's great. Now, with all of these different things that you've done, I mean, they're all separate, but do you find there's a common thread when it comes to creation?
Sure. I think, some of the old fundamentals, good composition, laying out the page or laying out the show or any one of those things always really comes down to, does it make sense? Is that the most enjoyable angle to do it at? So all the things that I do in directing, they apply directly to comic books, of course, as well. So, you're setting up a shot. Well, it's, a high angle shot is set up for a reason. It's not just because it's a pretty shot. So, setting up those storytelling devices is very much a thread that goes through everything I do. Part of the reason I usually get hired to do a lot of action adventure stuff in animation, and I've worked on Voltron Force, of course, and Chaotic and all those kind of shows, is because of the fact that I have a background in comic books and I understand the nature of how that idea of gutter time can work, where you don't have to always explain everything. You can show Batman get in the Batmobile and the next scene can be at Commissioner Gordon's office. We don't have to have him race through the city and all that kind of thing, right? So there's a sort of a short language that works in comics that is starting to find itself into animation now. So I find that thread plays all the way through. Cool.
Now, getting right into the nitty-gritty about your creative process, can you walk me through what tools you use to create your art?
Sure. So I draw everything on a Cintiq now. I've been working digitally for almost about 15 or 16 years. I haven't. I draw on paper at Comic Cons, of course, to people read. But everything I do is digital now. So I work on a Cintiq. It's a 32-inch screen, nice big one, and it rotates like an animation disc, so I can move it around all kinds of different ways. And I use Autodesk Sketchbook Pro for drawing. Okay. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite programs. It's very touch sensitive and it feels a little bounce. And in conjunction with the Cintiq, which has a tempered glass, which actually feels like paper when you lean into it, those two programs really, really work well for drawing. I do all my inking on Sketchbook as well, and I do all my coloring with Photoshop.
Oh, okay. Now, you mentioned going to shows, and that's where we met up just recently at Fan Expo. And that's sort of a catch-22. You say you're moving into digital and you've got NFTs, yet when you go to shows, people want to take away something with them. Do you find that in the future, it might be like, hey, I'm going to do a digital sketch, and I will email it to you or send it to your email address as opposed to going away with a physical thing? Do you think that ever might come to fruition?
I do a fair amount of that now, to be honest with you. A lot of times when you're at a Comic-Con, some people just don't have time to wait. I'll get a bit of a lineup at a Comic-Con. So, and I move very quickly. I don't know if you remember when seeing me, but when I go to a Comic-Con, it's about the interaction with the fans. That's what I'm about. So I like to draw for them and I like to speak with them at the time. So I take about 15, 20 minutes at the most on most drawings. And I do a nice full color, kind of quick, sketchy, fun drawing. It's usually more based on the idea than necessarily the perfect composition or anything like that. I'm just trying to catch the energy. So that part is pretty cool. But what happens oftentimes is people say, Lex, I don't have time to wait. Can I just, contact you on Instagram, direct message you, and you send me out a commission? And I often will do them digitally for them. And then, I'll just print it out and do some coloring and, send it in. So that's actually happening quite a bit. But because people still want original pieces, this is where NFTs come in and are so wonderful for us who work digitally. Is that, for the longest time, it was very hard to track any way to kind of sell that kind of work because everybody could just cut and paste it, Yeah. So by using blockchain and blocking off that ability for people to do that, and then, you can always do a screen grab or whatever, but that's very low res. It really changes the game for us as digital artists. And, so many people that I know that work in comics work digitally now. I mean, it's very rare that you find people still working on paper. Some of the older dudes do, but all the up and coming guys work digitally. So having the ability to protect our work and having the ability to now actually give to a fan an original piece of digital artwork with a blockchain on it so they actually own the original piece, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, you don't see it on eBay like in 15 minutes after it's been sold, right?
Absolutely. They can't. They can't. They have the ability to resell it, but they have to go through a bigger process. So it's not like, I would be at Comic Cons in my early career. I would literally finish a sketch, half an hour later, it's up on eBay.
For triple the price or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, you bet. Easily.
Do you think, the other thing too about it, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but typically a lot of people who are really into comics will go back and find the actual storyboards, the flats that people did. And that's sort of one of the detriments, I guess, is as we move into this digital age of making comic books, those things are disappearing. Do you ever think that, that's something it's lost now to us?
I suppose to a certain degree, but I think, for every door that shuts, a window opens, as it were. Yeah. And I think that the NFTs, once they, become a little more understood for people, I think they will continue to grant that. Once we are creating this original artwork, once we blockchain it, that is the same as getting, a spreadsheet or a full inked page. So it will have the same value. It will be the same. You will be the only person that actually owns that, because when I go to Comic Cons now, I bring this big portfolio filled with all these, how long I've been doing this for. I'm 30 years old. So I've got all those years of, Dexter's Laboratory, Scooby-Doo, Futurama, all that stuff. So I bring all that, and people love to buy the original work. But, as the years go by, that portfolio is getting thinner and thinner, and because I'm more digital. So I'm really, really looking forward to the idea that once people sort of understand and begin to accept NFTs, which is inevitable, they'll start to understand the value of buying the digital piece the same that you would if you were buying an original piece of paper.
Okay, that makes sense. I wanted to switch gears a wee bit. I noted that you're also you're a teacher at Emily Carr. So with that in mind, I'm wondering, what is you've got, whenever you go to a show, people come and say, hey, how do I make a comic book? But I'm wondering if you have one piece of advice you pass along to anyone wanting to make a comic book, what would that be? Well,
I always say to people, the only way, like, depending if you're an artist or a writer, and if you're a writer, read, read a lot. Get out there and, don't keep reading comics for ideas. The great comic book writers, they're reading Asimov, they're reading, Harlan Ellison, they're getting inspired by incredible writers so that they can then, use that inspiration to create brand new original ideas. And same thing with artists, don't look to comic book artists to learn how to draw. It's the worst idea you could possibly do. You want to look to life, you want to go take life drawing classes. You want to draw your friends. You want to study cars and study, buildings and all those things. And, really, really put that into your portfolio. Get a sketchbook and draw every single day. There's a great quote from Ollie Johnson in The Illusion of Life that says, 1 day away from drawing and you notice the difference. 2 days away from drawing and everybody notices the difference. I always tell everybody, draw all the time, and draw from life. Do not draw from, because even myself, when I'm drawing something that, even based on human form, I'm taking some liberties with it, as every artist does. I'm streamlining this line here, or I'm doing a straight line to a curve over here, and that kind of thing. So I'm already interpreting the human form. So when you're interpreting my interpretation, it becomes very twisted, right? It's not the way to learn to draw. You want to learn to draw from actual life, and taking life drawing courses is the key thing. When I was teaching at Emily Carr, I always had life drawing classes as well. So I could show the people, how it breaks down, the storytelling, all those things, those are all obviously super important in comics, and that's why I say, if you're wanting to write or you want to draw comics, you got to be a big fan of film. You got to watch a lot of film and see why directors choose camera angles and why the lighting changes or any of those kind of things. Those are all for a reason. Things don't just happenstance. And same thing with writing, I would say. When you're writing, you don't want to be telegraphing it. As soon as we are reading something in the written word, we're aware of the fact that somebody wrote it. It's not like a conversation. If you and I are talking and I just blurted out the word sausage, well, that has nothing to do with anything. It's just the word sausage. But in a comic book or a movie, if I say sausage, that's probably going to play out into something a little bit later on. The reason it's being said. So understanding the language of film and understanding the language of literature, they are so important in creating brand new, fresh comic book ideas. The idea of continually reading other people's comic books and trying to get ideas from that, it's a non-starter for me.
Yeah, most of the time when you're at a show, I'm sure people bring you art and you see that, they just copied or trying to emulate an artist, let's say like Neil Adams, like that Batman book. Sure. What do you say to these people that are, that have it down pat? They've got it down, but you see that it's almost like a copy of this other artist. Like, what do you say to these people?
Well, that's a funny one for me because, I started in Adventures in the DC Universe for DC, which I was asked to draw like Bruce Timm. My very first gig was drawing like somebody else, so that was, it was. And, so what I realized at that point, and this is what I say to those people is, don't focus on trying to draw exactly like that person. Focus on how they lay out a page. Jack Kirby is one of my favorites, of course, right? Because of the way he can lay out a page, and there's so much action and emphasis and dynamism that plays into that everybody starts to get Kirby envy because of the fact he's so good. And so, I often will say to people, look, if what you're doing here is trying to say, I'm your Neil Adams guy, okay, but that's a very narrow parameter for which you're going to have a career. So when I went to DC, when DC hired me, they saw the fact that I had an animation background. So they said, well, you should be able to draw like this. And I said, yeah, I can definitely do that. So that's what we did. But I didn't go to them with, a whole bunch of Bruce Timm drawings. I went with a bunch of drawings that looked like my stuff, but they recognized with my background, I'd be able to do it. So that's what that became when I started working on Justice League Adventures. I even tried to be much more devoted to the Bruce Timm style because Adventures, we were sort of this strange amalgamation of that universe and the current universe. So Kyle Rayner was Green Lantern, Wally West was the Flash. It was this weird thing. So we were creating original character designs and our own sort of look to it based essentially on the animated style. When I went into Justice League, that was a preordained show. Everything was that. So I drew it exactly like that. So everything that I put into my art was in the panels. So I usually say that to people. I go, I get that you love this artist, but that artist is still alive.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe don't focus on that. I saw a guy came in once with some just beautiful Bernie Wrightson inspired work. And I said to the guy, I said, like, this is gorgeous, beautiful. He goes, yeah, I really like Bernie Wrightson. I said, well, there is no more Bernie Wrightson right now, so this might not be a bad thing for you,
Right.
So, yeah. So, it just depends on how devoted to it, I suppose, you are. If it is truly a homage, if it's something that you absolutely love and adore, like you look at Phil Jimenez and George Perez, right? Phil is very open about his love for George Perez's work. I remember one time being at Comic-Con and the two of them saw each other and they ran across the room and embraced and George said, "My son," but that really worked well because what Phil did was he took something that clearly inspired him and he was excited about, and he ratcheted it up. Like he even went further than what George Perez did. So his scenes would be filled with more characters and stuff. So he always took what George did and said, I'm going to do it just a little bit bigger than what, if you can imagine even being bigger than George Perez when you consider Crisis on Infinite Earths. But yeah, Phil did that. And that's such a cool thing. So I think, I've seen a couple of people kind of roll in with a Rizzo sort of look, or I've seen a lot of people are trying to kind of get the J. Scott Campbell kind of thing, especially the way it draws women. And I'm going like, if you look at the way J. Scott Campbell draws those women, there's such strong anatomy in those poses. They're not just this idea of what you're sort of whipping up and, trying to get this cute chick. It's actually a well thought out panel and page. And that's why he's so good. If you look at Danger Girl, some of those panels are just incredibly told. So, if you're going to pick somebody to be inspired by, pick somebody like that, but don't be inspired by the way that they draw, be inspired by the way that they create.
Okay, well said, for sure. So we've talked about a lot of different projects you have on the go. Is there anything up and coming that you're allowed to talk about?
Yeah, that's always the tough part because I have a couple right now in the can that I'm waiting on. I had a company that right before COVID, unfortunately, went away. One of the losses of COVID, and it was called Comic Stream. And Comic Stream, I had created a series called Doc Knock, and that's my wholly owned series with me writing and drawing it. I got to about 2 or 3 issues, but the publishing stopped, but I still own the issues. So I'm going to finish that one, and I want to get that one out through a major distributor. So I'm talking with people right now about doing that, and that would be really, really nice to have my own ongoing comic with just me writing and drawing.
Nice. Good stuff. So that being said, where do you recommend that people go online and through social media to find about your current and your future projects?
The best place for me is John Delaney 40 at Instagram. I post everything I'm doing. I post all the Comic-Con sketches and whatever I've got sort of up and coming. I usually talk about it. I'm not one of those people that on social media tells you what I had for breakfast. I just talk about the things that I'm working on, because I'm assuming that's why people are coming to the page, like I'm sure nobody cares what my hair looks like, but so I do, occasionally post a little bit about my band and different things of that, but mostly it's just about art and comics and, and sort of showing a little behind the scenes things, sketches and stuff. And then I'll post pages and I'll post, what it looked like when I finished it and then what it looked like once it was colored, those kind of things. So they're kind of fun. I've had quite a few, people DM me about enjoying the fact of seeing the behind the scenes stuff. So I do quite a bit of that.
Cool. Okay. Well, John, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview?
To anybody who's trying to start out in comics, there's 2 things that are happening right now. One, you have an ability to get a little bit more access through online to the editors, and editors right now are much more open to the idea of hiring people with a little less experience, as long as they got a decent following and they can obviously hit deadlines and that kind of thing. So there's a much more open field for comic book artists, a lot more so than it was when I first started out. And, you were just sending in things by FedEx and hoping that an editor would open it up. So you have more of a direct line, but it also means you have a greater responsibility to do great work, because now there's a whole bunch of people out there. So one of the things I always say to artists is, do not compare yourself to who you think is the worst. Compare yourself to who you think is the best, and then you'll get work. If you start going, I remember Rob Liefeld was a bit of a punching bag for a while there. Like people were always, after this Captain America thing, everybody was just harping on him. He's a very talented artist who's really done some amazing work and created some incredible characters. So he doesn't deserve the being shat on that he has. But people would come up to me and go, well, I'm better than Liefeld. And I go, well, first of all, you're not. But secondly, if you were, that's not exactly where you want to go. You want to go, I want to be as good as Jim Lee. I want to be as good as Mark Silvestri. I want to, if you're going to the image thing, or if you're playing with some painting, you want to look at Dan Brenton, or you want to look at Alex Ross and see the guys who are the zenith and go for that. That's what you want to fight for. Because if you are hoping to get a career in here, nobody's going, geez, I'm hoping I could find sort of a mediocre artist here to fill in. No, they're not. They're looking for somebody great to fill in. So you better be great.
Thanks to John for the chat. You can discover more about John on Instagram at JohnDelaney40. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2022.